Welcome everybody, my name's Dawn Medici. I'm with Oxford Township Parks and Recreation, and I'm currently doing the programming here in the Senior Center. So welcome. I'd like to introduce to you today Alan Marock, who is going to share with you his love for model airplane history. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy this. And Alan will also be presenting again in an evening. I believe it's in November. So if you're interested again, or you have some friends, go back and share with them that they've got to come back and see Alan's presentation. All right, so thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
You're welcome.
I'd like to introduce my wife, Bonnie, who is my assistant and was generous to help me set up this morning, and actually has been very supportive of not only my business when I was involved with Classic Aero and model airplanes, but also for taking part in this presentation. So basically what I'd like to do is spend a little time on sharing the development of model airplanes and how that relates to full-scale aviation. So the table representing the development is here, and as I go back, then we're going to talk about the development of the full-scale aircraft and how that related to the modeling aspect of it. So back in the 20s and 30s, the most available thing to modelers was the rubber power. Prior to that was gliders. So there was a lot of design related to full-scale aircraft from like Curtiss, Douglas Aviation, Grumman, all the major suppliers of full-scale aircraft, and modeling was part of that in the design and development stage. So with the development of wind tunnels, they were able to come up with a new design and then do some testing before anything was ever built or got into the air. So modeling really was a big aspect of that. And then when World War II came along, modeling was also involved with that because they were building solid models in training for the pilots and how the surfaces worked and how it related to full-scale aircraft. So modeling has always been a really big aspect of aviation. So back then, with rubber power, we're talking about basically, this would be a smaller design powered by rubber. And this was a kit that was produced, I think, in the 40s and 50s. So this has been quite around for quite a while. And this is one that I built. This is more like a peanut scale airplane, and I brought it here just to show the construction of it, and that's why it's not covered. So it's a good presentation of how delicate and how light the lightness is required in order to make it to the flyable stage. So then we get into the 30s, and now this was developed back at that particular time as a free flight model. And you can see the dihedral in the wingspan, in the wing, which made it stable. When you let it go, you had no control over it in the earlier stages. So right after that, RC was being developed, and it required this kind of a model in order to carry the weight of the RC equipment. Now, at that particular time, they were using this airplane as there's like 5 or 6 of these that were developed. The Powerhouse, the Miss America, there's a couple more that were developed that were used to develop RC. And the only control they actually had was on the rudder and elevator, and it was what they call the bang-bang system, where you actually, the box was quite large, and you just bumped it to turn the airplane. And it was pretty iffy. There was a lot of them that didn't come back. But with today's technology, this airplane now has a more sophisticated motor. It has a 3-channel radio, so I have complete control, throttle, rudder, elevator on this airplane. And I built this really from a gift that the kit was given to me from one of my customers in California, and I've had it for 15 years. And we were having a conversation on the phone, and I said, geez, can you guys come back, your wife and yourself? He said, I'll come back if you build that airplane. So that was the incentive to build it this year. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but I'm hoping maybe next year it will work out. So as we go down the table here, we're going now from a 3-channel airplane into a 4-channel airplane. And this is a typical trainer that a lot of modelers start with under a supervisor to be able to help the person get started, okay? So now we can fly in a buddy box, where before you weren't connected and the transmitter was held by the instructor, and then he gave it to the student, and then it was always an issue of getting the transmitter back if there was a problem. So today's technology is much more advanced and affordable as well. I think the price, like this airplane, is what we call an ARF. It's built, ready to fly. The only thing that you have to do is add the receiver. So the transmitter and the airplane built is a package. So that's one way you can start out if you're interested in starting out in the hobby. It's a much faster way to get started rather than build your own type airplane, although some people still like to build, and the kits are available. So from that perspective, we get down to this technology, which is a pre-built airplane. It comes ready to fly with the transmitter, and this is about a $125 package. This airplane with the transmitter is also available to fly indoors, like at the sports arena. Like I've flown this there many times, and Charles, my friend here, has witnessed that. So through the Cloudbusters, they have once a week they'll fly on Thursdays from like 12 to 3. So they fly rubber, and I'm power airplanes, so I'm fortunate that I can fly this, and I kind of stay out of their way. So the modeling goes from the early days, which I wanted to jump down here just for a moment. And this is what I started with when I was about 8 years old and my brother was 10. And you can see, after the presentation, you can come up and observe how things have changed. So we had basically started out with Berkeley, and then Comet was quite popular then. And you can see that on this particular model package, we had to cut out all the parts. Everything was made by the builder. The wire, the landing gear, cutting out the framework. They supplied the sticks and the rubber, the propeller, and took a lot of work to be able to build something like this. We didn't have a lot of success flying these type airplanes because they were quite heavy. So from that aspect, Gullows came out with what we call die cutting parts. So if you look at the parts in the kit here, the sheet is all pre-cut for you. So that was a big advancement from cutting out the parts and also vacuum forming some of the detail parts. So big difference between Gullows and then the progress from the Comet kits. But Comet kits eventually did upgrade their kits, and it became more reasonable to build. And then Berkeley was kind of the top of the line as far as model airplanes to build, and they had die cutting as well. And their plans were much more sophisticated, and they also included some of the vacuum form engine parts. So you can see the progression here from what we started with, say, in the 40s, and then developed to a current situation, which is laser cutting. And this is a recent kit that was produced probably in the 80s. So we go from hand cutting to die cutting to laser. And you can see in this kit how everything is prepackaged and ready to go. And it also includes some vacuum form parts and bent landing gears, much more easier, friendly to handle for a younger person. One of the other ways to build in the earlier days was from plans where you did everything. So you'd got the plan, bought your material separately from the hobby shop or whatever you could find, like the wire, and the parts here are paper cut for the cowling. Nothing is vacuum formed at this point. So this is really a labor of love to build from this. And then today, currently, this is what I would start with if I was going to take a young person and start them on an airplane. This package is laser cut. It's a sport scale airplane. It's not meant to be a scale airplane like all of these are, which makes a scale airplane is much more difficult to fly. Takes a lot of experience, where this is a simple design and can be built probably in a day with you supervising a younger person. This is really a good way to start. So you might want to make a note of that. And here's another example of a package which is in that same category. Now this is called basically a flying wing. Simple to build, and these models really fly well. I know I taught model building at the Orion Library. Harold Reuter was the champion of that process and setting the program up, and we had like maybe 10 or 15 students, and we all flew something basically like this. In an evening, we built the airplanes, I think, in about an hour and a half. And then we'd all go outside and fly them. Some of them ended up on the roof, but they fly really well. Pardon? Rubber. Yeah. So there's a lot out there now that wasn't when we were a lot younger. You know, the technology with the laser cutting and the vacuum forming and the equipment is so much more affordable and lighter. And also, this is plastic models that is available. I use these basically for, excuse me, for documentation. Here's an example of that, this airplane right here. This is a Focke-Wulf Ta, and you can see underneath how it matches. Okay, so that's the reason I buy these. And then when I'm through with the airplane, then I usually sell them at a swap meet. And that's another way to get started. If you look in one of the magazines, and I brought some magazines for each of you to take, yeah, right here. There's a lot of information on how to get started and model aviation events that are going on through the year. So maybe some of you, I know Charles is familiar with swap meets, right? And that's a...
You can buy this stuff?
Yes. Yeah, I have a sheet here that you can take with you that lists the 2 hobby shops and also a website on the internet. So you can look. And that's only a couple examples, but there's a lot more places you can look from when you look in these magazines, especially on the internet. And also you can see the manufacturers, the ads in here where they're offering their kits. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here, some articles. So I would hope that maybe each person could take one of these and for information. So
you don't care if we take one of these magazines?
I want you to take, that's why they're here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, everybody can take one. There's enough for everybody. So from the modeling aspect now, that gets us down to the full scale, kind of a history of what went on there from the Wright brothers all the way up through World War I. At the time of World War I, biplanes were really coming into the war as far as being functional. This particular airplane is called a Grumman F3, and it was the last biplane used in the United States in our carriers. From that transition, we went to the monoplane, single wing, so you can see how streamlined this is compared to the biplane. Much faster. This airplane could carry not only the pilot, but also a gunner. So you can see that in the rear of the airplane, how it worked. Wasn't a very comfortable situation.
What do they call it?
That's a Douglas airplane built by Douglas. And the other thing that changed is, if you notice the shape of the wing, the elliptical wing, you can see the difference compared to this airplane. This airplane has a continuous route and much draggier type airplane, especially on the wing. And then the fuselage, look at the difference in how slender. And look at the motor,
Yeah.
12-cylinder on that. Versus this was a radio, 9-cylinder. You can see a little bit of that in the detail, excuse me, in the cowling. That was a fast airplane though, and very aerobatic. This model represents a civilian flyer, Al Williams. He was a very famous pilot, and he did numerous air shows through a period of, from the late 40s probably to the 60s. And this was his first airplane. And he flew 2 other Grumman airplanes, with more sophisticated and faster. I guess he had quite a career. I don't know a lot about him. I've never seen any film on him or anything, but I know that this airplane is very aerobatic. This is the second airplane I built from the same plan. I sold the first one that I built, I think about 15 years ago. It flew really well, but this one is a pound lighter than the first one was.
Wow.
That's quite an achievement for taking a pound out. And this also has scale ribbing, and I put more detail in this airplane because I had more information and was able to learn more about it. So we go from the Douglas, now we're into World War II. This is a Focke-Wulf Ta. This was a German design, obviously, but this was the fastest prop plane built in the world. It would go 25 miles an hour faster than our Mustang. Fortunately for us, they came out late in the war, so it never had a chance to really have a lot of success. Most of these were destroyed on the runway. So we were going into Germany pretty heavy with our Mustangs. So this is a high altitude design. It was designed basically to knock out our bombers. So yeah, as a model, it's a good flying model, and I was always fascinated with it because of the longer wing on it. You could see how much larger the wing is and how narrow it is. So this airplane was definitely built for speed. And I included this so you could see the construction. This is typical construction currently with laser cutting. This airplane was developed on AutoCAD, and the parts that you see here still have the paper templates on them. So when I designed my first prototype in AutoCAD, I would print off all the parts on paper, and then I would attach them to the balsa wood, and then I'd hand cut the first prototype. And if that checked out, which it usually didn't, I'd go back to the AutoCAD drawing, make those changes, and then I'd go to the first laser cut, which this is. This is the second laser cut airplane, and check it one more time. So, and then if all that worked out, I could put the airplane in production, a kit of it, which would be like a short kit. It would be the drawings, the plans, the laser cut parts, and the vacuum formed parts, like the cowling. This section in here is vacuum formed along with a canopy. So, but that's kind of a slow process, but yes. Yes. Yeah, see, that's why I went to AutoCAD.
Oh, okay.
So I went back to school and took AutoCAD. And then once you have the AutoCAD files, you can send that to the cutter.
Oh.
And he can cut off the AutoCAD files.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a definite process, but it sure expedites the process of building an airplane like this. And then we get into the civilian aircraft. This is a Fairchild 22, and this is shortly after the Depression, 1929, I think it hit. So this airplane, Fairchild, like all the other manufacturers, struggled to survive after the Depression. So Fairchild brought out this, I'm sorry, I'm blocking the view here. You can see the cockpit in the rear. This had dual controls. So the main pilot could instruct the second pilot in learning to fly this airplane. And this is typical for this particular period with the open cockpit kind of an arrangement. It's similar to the Grumman. The first prototype of this was open cockpit, but as they developed it, they were able to enclose it. So this is another development that really transpired late in the 40s, and there again, because of the economic situation, they weren't able to sell a lot of these. So, and it forced a lot of the companies really out of business because of that. So I like the airplane basically because of the nostalgia of it, and the colors represent our flag. So I love our flag in red, white, and blue. So it doesn't get any better. So if you want to spend a few minutes and maybe look at any of this stuff, then, and you have any questions, then we can maybe go from there. Yes?
I'll have a comment. As far as swap meets go,
Yes.
almost everybody who sets up a swap meet posts them at any of the hobby shops. So
Yes.
If you go into the hobby shops and you look, they'll list where the swap meets are going to be.
That's correct. The other thing too about a swap meet, I've been involved with swap meets quite a few estate situations where modelers wanted to get out of it, and it's now at this particular time it's pennies on a dollar.
Wow.
That's what it is. So it's better for the guys buying than it is for the guys selling at this point, right, Charles? I mean,
Right.
you've been there enough.
Oh, yeah.
And I would caution you against maybe buying a radio at a swap meet, also buying a motor at a swap meet. I think you're better off, if you're going to get started in this, to start out with good equipment, okay, right from the start. Now, there's a lot of things you can buy at swap meets that there's not going to be an issue with, okay? Like if you were to buy a kit, as an example, or an ARF airplane. Let's say if you bought an airplane that was an ARF built in China, which is kind of taken over the hobby, really. There's very few modelers building anymore, and you can see the result of that here.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a lot of interest, and our whole culture has changed. But
Oh, yeah.
as I understand it, the grandparents with the new generation, their grandchildren are becoming more interested in this sort of hobby again. Not only this hobby, but also building like dinosaur kits and stuff like that. I see that with my son relating to his grandchildren.
Yeah.
And I think the artistic things are coming back because it's a new generation that he really hasn't learned or experienced any of this.
Right, right.
You know, they've taken a lot out of our schools, like the shop classes that I grew up with.
Right.
My brother actually built a gun in shop class. I mean, that tells you a lot, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So now,
Well-
that's disappearing. I was into seaplanes, and I started my business developing the S-38 Sikorsky and the S-39. And what started my business was, in 1998, there was a restoration full-scale airplane in Minnesota. They were building 2 full-scale prototypes of the S-38 Sikorsky,
Wow.
1928 design.
Wow.
The Carnuba, and also the African zebra. Yeah. So I went there. They invited me to come there because they heard of me building this model, and they were interested in my documentation. So I got invited to go to Minnesota in 1998
Wow.
and see what they were doing, and they helped me really develop my first kit of the S-38. And the first prototype that I took up there, I sold to Sikorsky Aviation. It's in their factory.
Wow.
So the money that I got from that experience, I was able to develop my business, Classic Aero.
Wow.
That's what started it. And I made 5 trips up there, and I photographed the construction of both those airplanes in detail.
Wow.
So, yeah. So after that, I developed the S-39, and I was fortunate again in my life to meet Richard Jackson, who was, after 40 years, was now finishing the restoration of a full-scale S-39.
Wow.
So I went up and met him. He invited me back a year later, and I spent a week working on the full-scale airplane. He assigned me to do the lettering on the wing because of my graphics experience, okay? So I photographed the development of that airplane right to the finish, and it was painted in the spirit of Africa with the spots of the giraffe.
Wow.
And he flew it to Michigan, I think. That's going back, what, 10 years, Bonnie?
At least.
Yeah, the S-38 full-scale replica and the S-39 full-scale replica flew to an event, I think it was, oh, I forget the name of the city now, but it was another event that took place in the 30s, and it was an annual event. The flyers and pilots met at this facility, and they reenacted that about 10 years ago with those two airplanes. And there were other classic airplanes there as well. I forgot the name of it now, but I've had a lot of history in the process of developing Sikorsky's. And that's really what started the business for me. So, because it was a seaplane, I eventually bought a bigger vacuum form machine, and I did the hulls completely in vacuum form. So I made the molds and then sold them as a package so others could build the airplane.
Wow.
So I had forgotten about all the vacuum forming, but yeah. But on this airplane, this cowl, I still have the smaller vacuum form machine, so I'm able to do the smaller stuff. The cowl I vacuum form, and then the engine inside the cowling is another piece that I made the mold for. And then this top section here, all the way back to the canopy, I gotta be careful I don't knock those wires off, I broke them twice. This is vacuum formed too. And then the canopy is vacuum formed. So there's 4 pieces here that are integrated into this design. And looking at this airplane, this is, again, vacuum formed. This is in 2 pieces. This canopy is vacuum formed. It's in a single piece. And you can see how it really adds to the functionality of the model. It adds that metal appearance to it, along with comparison to the fabric, and it makes a real nice setting in construction. And the same here. This is on the TA. The cowling is vacuum formed here. The spinner is vacuum formed. This is all vacuum formed all the way up past the canopy, and that extends all the way from the cowling to here. So this piece is hard, and this piece is too. And this detail piece is vacuum formed. You know, I forget about how much is in it, you know. But there's a lot of detail that really adds to the quality of the airplane. And also it's more functional from if you have a problem in flying the airplane and you now have to get into repairing the airplane, which happens. So I can take these pieces all off, and then I can get to the heart of the airplane, the internal parts. So I can stay and manage and control that as well. And this airplane is also modular. This is vacuum formed. This is a separate front piece. The top is a separate piece, vacuum formed all the way to here. And the 2 side pieces are vacuum formed right and left. And then the canopies are vacuum formed. That's a separate mold. And I think that's it on this airplane. So vacuum forming was a big part of my designing. And the machine that I had, I think, was 18 by 36. So I could do a pretty big mold. So that got to be pretty extensive. And, you know, vacuum forming is kind of a black art. And I kind of learned that the hard way. You can do 9 pieces perfect, and all of a sudden you'll get 2 failures. I mean, totally throw it in the trash. And I can never explain it. It's either got to be temperature or a different chemistry makeup in that sheet of plastic. But things happen. Life is a mystery some days, huh? We did pretty good, I'd say. Thank you for coming.
Live from you.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Very good.